What about this picture of the world over here? You were saying earlier, was it good to have a lower figure of people breastfeeding, or good to have a higher figure of breastfeeding? This is a map of the world, and it's got a few countries that they've highlighted how many people breastfeed. And, good point, say it again.
We're actually the lowest.
We are actually the lowest. And do you see it says 2% of people in England breastfeed? Do you think that's surprising?
That's really surprising, yeah.
And you compare who's the highest. Rwanda looks pretty high. 90% of people in Rwanda.
But then you can't really compare like a little country like England to a big country like America, for example, or like France, Germany.
Why not?
Because it's a bit of an unfair survey, really, because obviously there's going to be less people living in England than there are in the whole of Germany.
Yeah, but if it's a percentage, then you take all of the number of people and then you work out the percentage of people. So percentages are probably the better number to use.
Yeah, I think it's quite strange how, well, not strange, but how, like, in Africa, for example, there's a higher percentage of people breastfeeding than there are in England, because obviously we are more developed than their countries.
So we have a lot more money than they do, so we can buy bottles, whereas they can't.
Now, the students that we spoke to earlier were very interested. There was one long poster which looked at the amount of people who breastfeed worldwide. Mm-hmm. And there were, huge percentages for, I think, people in Rwanda, something like 90% of the population there breastfeed for the first 6 months. And in England, it was 2%. And they were very surprised by the fact that it was such a low uptake. Why do you think that would be the case, that England is just so low?
I think once again, the figures, I believe, are coming up, certainly within small areas when we can look at perhaps deprived areas where we're giving them literature, and those areas are coming up, which will obviously have an impact on the entire country. I think countries like Rwanda, they nurture their children. They're in large family groups, probably some living with parents and grandparents and sisters, and they all live in the same place. And so to breastfeed your baby is the safest, normally, way, and formula milks aren't so readily available. I think previously we have become a culture of things just becoming just too easy, and we're not looking at what we're already supplied with. But I'm really confident with all of the literature and the marketing, and with the help of the TV ads, however they are for formula milks, they are starting to include breastfeeding in those ads. I think figures really will come up, but it is quite shocking and very disappointing.
What sort of attitudes do you find with the people that you speak to here? Have people considered breastfeeding before they have their children?
Often it's not really a question that we put to parents in the antenatal period, whether they are going to breastfeed their baby. However, one of the classes that I do here is a breastfeeding workshop where we talk about positioning and possible issues that other mothers will come up, and what to do in those circumstances, who they can call on. We have a large group of volunteers who are just wonderful in the Folkestone area, and I couldn't get to all of the women that I see without them. But I think that we've got to make the information available to all parents, expected parents, in the antenatal period, so they're making an informed choice rather one based on what a neighbour's daughter went through or what a friend's friend went through. They need to be informed choices.
And do you find that people are open to that discussion? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I'm really excited by the fact actually that parents want to know more. We use a couple of short clips from DVDs, one from the Biological Nurturing DVD, which always actually causes a stir and makes them talk about it. I know that previously we've tried different ways of having parents interact, and one of the ways is I've got lots and lots of pictures of women breastfeeding in third world countries, women in suits, sitting on a train, laying on the beach in a bikini, quite prominent pictures of lots of different women breastfeeding, and often that will cause people to start asking questions about, well, I didn't know you could do that, and what's happening there, and it just normalises really what they're there to. I'm there to teach them.
Do you find that people, when we were having this discussion, we were having a discussion in the office before I came out to do this recording, and there were 3 girls in the office, 2 of whom, well, me as a girl, and 2 who don't have children. And the conversation quite quickly moved on to the perception of, public breastfeeding in public. Yeah. And they equated that to sunbathing topless, and whether you would do that. And they felt that if you were all facing the same way, so if you're on the beach and you're all facing the sea, then sunbathing topless is perfectly fine because you're all facing everywhere. If you're sitting around a swimming pool and deciding to sunbathe topless, then that's a little bit unacceptable because it's really in your face, then you can't actually look away. And then somebody else suggested that actually she's the one who lies on the lie-low in the middle of the pool, topless, and therefore, open to all to see. So is it the sort of thing that if people find, topless sunbathing appropriate, then they're more likely to think of breastfeeding in public? Or, is it a similar sort of thing? People don't know where to look, and if everyone else is doing it, then they'll do it.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is you can't really compare the two. Somebody that is sunbathing topless, that requires them to have their bra and their top off. That's not a requirement of breastfeeding in public at all. To give you some examples, many women that come to the breastfeeding support group that I do here, coming for the first time, it's normally one of the first things that's on their mind. And if I've seen them in the home, I'll usually encourage them into the group and say, well, it's your first breastfeeding in public experience. You're in the comfort of being surrounded by other women that are feeding, however you are out of the house. So use it for a halfway house kind of measure. And very often the peer supporters will say to the new mums, well, I'll meet you in town and we'll go for a coffee, and you can feed for the first time, it'll be fine. I think there's 2 very, very positive things that are going on in Folkestone certainly at the moment. The stickers that we've put in the windows of shops, and these aren't just coffee shops, so they're not just places that you have to buy a drink and sit somewhere. One of the clothes shops in town, a few of them actually, but one in particular springs to mind, where I went and spoke to the manager and I said, would you be happy for somebody to breastfeed in the store? And they said, well, I don't have a problem, but I've nowhere to put them, this is a clothes shop. And I said, well, legally you have to have a disabled changing room with a chair. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, they would only need to sit there for 5 or 10 minutes to feed their baby and then they'll be gone. And they said, well, of course, that's no problem. So the responses were really good. We're now spreading the word very much with, there's lots of places in Folkestone that people expect people to come in and breastfeed. The other very positive thing that's going on is people are starting to realise that you don't have to strip off to feed a baby at all. There's all sorts of fandangled tops and bras available on the market, but they're actually not necessary. You don't need to go out and buy lots of different things. There's loads of different hints and tips that the mothers share amongst themselves. And quite recently we had a husband come to the breastfeeding group with his wife and their newborn for the first time, and he said, is it okay if I stay? And I said, you're very welcome. And he said, oh, thank goodness for that. He said, I thought I would walk in and everyone would be sitting there breastfeeding. And I went, they are. And he had absolutely no idea. He went very red when he realised. But it is a very discreet thing. We're not stripping off to feed our babies in the same way that, some mothers feel that if they go for dinner somewhere, then, they perhaps have to go and sit in the toilet to feed their baby. And my argument to them, or what I would put to them, would be, would you want to eat your dinner in the toilet? Because it's no different. You're just feeding your baby in a discreet manner. It shouldn't cause concern for anybody. And if anybody was to, question a woman feeding a baby, while they're eating their dinner, their option is to have a baby screaming for food. It's not fair. It's not right. And in actual fact, the more women that are looking at things slightly differently, other than just the thought of offending somebody else. That's not the issue. It's actually just getting over their own personal fears themselves.
One of the discussion points associated with this exhibition was looking at breastfeeding in public, and mentioned how in Scotland you had the right to breastfeed anywhere in public. Yet in England you could still be legally, somebody could still legally come up to a breastfeeding mother and ask them not to do that in public.
Yeah, I mean, to my understanding, babies over 6 months, they could ask for them to leave. But even then, I really don't think there would be many places bold enough to ask a mother not to feed her child, which is all she's doing. She's doing nothing other than nurturing her child. So I've not heard of anybody having a negative experience in Folkestone for quite a while now.